Humiliated and bankrupt, Alara watched her family's legacy shatter. Then a dark, silent stranger appeared at the auction, buying her entire world with a single, audacious bid. He was Dante Volkov, a ruthless Mafia boss billionaire who obliterated her tormentor and fiercely claimed her. She thought she could escape his control, but when she was kidnapped, he unleashed an empire of brutal revenge, vowing to burn the city to reclaim his prize. The air within the Vance atelier was thick with the ghost of old oil paints, the brittle scent of aged paper, and faint, lingering whisper of oak wood from ancient frames. For Alara Vance, these aromas were not merely memories. They were a crushing weight, a heavy cloak of the past draped over her suffocating present. Every morning, as the anemic Manhattan sunlight pierced through the towering windows, casting long, bruised shadows across the worn wooden floors, Alara felt a part of her soul constricting. At 28, instead of living the vibrant life of a promising art curator, she had become the last sentinel of a crumbling legacy, a final bastion against an encroaching tide of utter despair. She stirred on the tattered velvet sofa in the back office, a dog-eared ledger and a pencil still clutched between her fingers. Her back was a rigid ache, her neck stiff as if she'd carried the weight of the entire world on her shoulders throughout the night. Her eyelids fluttered open, just enough to discern the dust motes dancing in the lone, hesitant shafts of light. Each awakening was a fresh assault, her body a rusted machine, groaning from her lower back to the crown of her head. The single fluorescent light in the room hummed with a sickly yellow glow, making the shadows around her dance like malevolent specters of desperation, whispering promises of inevitable failure. Alara sighed, the only sound to break the pre-dawn stillness. That sigh carried the exhaustion of hundreds of sleepless nights, of thousands of relentless hours, a heavy testament to her solitary battle. Instant coffee, stone-cold and acrid, was the only breakfast she could contemplate. It slid down her throat, a bitter, constant reminder of her harsh reality. No more money for decent meals, just survival. The gallery, the Vance Atelier, had once been a jewel in the city's vibrant art district. It had witnessed glittering openings, heard the clink of champagne flutes, and resonated with endless accolades for the Vance family's priceless collection. Now, silence was its most frequent visitor, so heavy it could be physically felt, like a funeral shroud draped over every canvas. The closed for renovation sign on the glass door had morphed into the most blatant lie Alara had to repeat daily, a flimsy shield concealing the raw, brutal truth. The pain wasn't merely from financial ruin. It stemmed from loss, from absence. Her father, once her anchor and the gallery's vibrant soul, was now a pale shadow, battling a debilitating illness in an exorbitantly expensive nursing home. Medical bills piled up, each statement taller than the grandest paintings in the gallery, a piercing reminder of her helpless inadequacy. Every collection notice was a knife thrust into her fragile hope, tearing away at the carefully constructed facade she desperately maintained. As the sole heir, Alara had shouldered everything. Loneliness gnawed at her, bit by bit, transforming her into a ghost haunting the relics of a glorious past. She had no one to confide in, no one to share the crushing burden that pressed down on her shoulders. "Breathe, Alara," she murmured to herself, her voice hoarse and lost in the vast, unyielding space, finding no echo. "Redemption," she whispered, the words sounding as foreign as a lost incantation, a desperate, futile prayer. She rose, her bare feet meeting the cold wooden floor, feeling the rough grain beneath her soles, the calluses earned from countless hours spent hunched over delicate restorations. She moved through the main gallery, her fingers brushing lightly over tarnished gilt frames, feeling the thin layer of dust on masterpieces. She knew every hairline crack in the oil paint, every untold story hidden behind each brushstroke. They were her family, the last breath of a past she refused to relinquish, a fragile tether binding her to a world slowly fading into oblivion. Daylight fully crept in, bringing with it the familiar cacophony of the city. Distant sirens wailed, the hurried footsteps of pedestrians on the sidewalk. Everything outside was alive, bustling, a cruel mockery of Alara's stagnation, her entrapment within these crumbling walls. She thought of earlier days when her father was well, when the Vance Atelier pulsed with life. The animated discussions about the meaning of color, the history behind each stroke, were now just aching memories. Now there was only her and the profound, suffocating silence. Alara's greatest fear wasn't the loss of the gallery itself. That, in a way, felt inevitable. Her true, raw fear was losing her grandmother's unfinished portrait, a gifted but tragically short-lived artist. The painting was hidden in the back office, carefully draped in an old silk cloth, like a sacred secret. It was Alara's personal treasure, a tangible link to her roots, to a pure, unadulterated love for art, to a piece of her soul she fiercely guarded from any touch. Sometimes, when the loneliness became unbearable, when the burden felt too heavy to carry, she would sit before that painting, pull back the cloth, and stare into the unfinished brushstrokes, feeling the tenderness and love her grandmother had poured into it. It was the last beacon in her dark tunnel, a silent promise that beauty still existed, even as her world disintegrated, but that beacon was dimming, obscured by the encroaching shadow of a single name. Marcus Thorne. The name made her throat tighten, a nauseating bitterness worse than cold coffee. A cunning real estate developer, he had coveted the Vance Atelier's prime location for years. He wanted to demolish it, to replace its soul with a sterile, soulless edifice, a blatant challenge to every aesthetic Alara cherished. He had exploited her vulnerability, acquiring minor debts, then systematically tightening his grip, turning her into his prey, a cornered animal with no escape. His lawyer's letters, thick and dry, arrived religiously every week, each one a new threat, a fresh ultimatum, written in cold legal jargon that nonetheless possessed destructive power. On XX day of YY month, in the absence of sufficient funds, all assets will be seized. Every word was a hammer blow, sealing the coffin of the Vance Atelier. Alara knew she couldn't resist much longer. Her solitary efforts were like weak waves crashing against a granite cliff. She had reached out to everyone, friends in the art world, acquaintances who might offer assistance, but no one could or would confront Thorne's insidious influence. Too big, Alara, they'd say, their eyes laced with pity and thinly veiled fear. You should give up. They avoided her gaze, as if her desperation might be contagious. Give up. How could she give up when this was all she had left? To give up meant to betray her father, to betray her grandmother, to betray her very essence. She walked to her ancient desk, switching on the antiquated laptop. The bluish light illuminated her gaunt face, highlighting the dark circles under her eyes. Her inbox overflowed with overdue payment reminders, urgent demands for repayment. Each time she looked at those numbers, a wave of nausea washed over her. She was a restorer, a curator, a guardian of beauty. She was not a warrior. And she was losing, utterly and devastatingly. The office phone shrilled, startlingly loud in the morning silence. Alara flinched, her heart hammering against her ribs, so loud she thought the entire city could hear it. She knew who it was. It would be one of Thorne's lawyers, or another creditor with their empty yet effective threats. She let it ring, once, twice, 3 times. Each ring a fresh nail hammered into the coffin of the Vance Atelier, each one a confirmation of a fate already sealed. Finally, the phone fell silent. Alara exhaled, a fleeting moment of reprieve before the fear returned, stronger than ever. The fear of tomorrow, of the forced auction. The auction she knew would mark the end of everything she had fought for. She closed her eyes, trying to banish the image of paintings being torn from the walls, trying not to think of her grandmother's portrait being desecrated, ripped apart by the crude hands of a greedy man. She knew she had to be strong, but that strength was draining away, bleeding out like from an open wound. She was just Alara Vance, a lonely woman, trapped amidst the ruins of a legacy, waiting for the day her fate would be decided. And that day, inevitable and relentless, had arrived. Heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway outside, the sound of a truck pulling to a halt. The auction. The final turning point was upon her. The air in the Vance Atelier was no longer just thick with the ghosts of oil paint. It was now a cloying mixture of cheap perfume, stale anticipation, and the metallic tang of the auctioneer's gavel. For Alara, it was the suffocating stench of an ending. The midday sun, usually a welcome beacon, now seemed to mock her, brutally highlighting every crack in the once proud plaster, every layer of dust clinging to the relics of her past. She stood pressed against a cold, marble pillar near the back, her breath shallow, her heart a frantic bird trapped within her ribs. Each murmur from the assembled crowd, each pitying glance or curious stare, felt like a needle pricking her skin. Marcus Thorne, the orchestrator of this public desecration, loomed in the front row, his smirk a grotesque caricature of triumph. His eyes, glinting with a predatory satisfaction, occasionally swept over Alara, savoring her humiliation. She wore a simple, worn black dress, her hair pulled back in a neat, defiant bun, but her eyes, usually soft and contemplative, blazed with a raw blend of impotence and simmering resentment. Every bid, every chanted number, was a dagger plunge into her past, into her father's legacy, into the fragile hope of a future she had so desperately clung to. A cold sweat traced a path down her spine, not from heat, but from the sheer, overwhelming dread. Her lungs felt compressed, each breath a struggle. This was it. This was the crushing finale. And next, the auctioneer, a bald, reedy-voiced man whose jovial demeanor felt utterly out of place, chirped, "We have a rare 17th century miniature depicting an anonymous noblewoman. A delicate beauty, meticulously restored, I might add. Starting bid." Alara held her breath. That miniature, though not a grand masterpiece, was one of her particular favorites. Its diminutive size belied an exquisite craftsmanship, each brushstroke whispering of forgotten narratives. It rested precariously on a tall, slender easel, far too high for its fragile nature, gleaming under the harsh gallery lights. Suddenly, a clumsy assistant, attempting to navigate around a rushing patron, jostled the easel. The moment elongated, stretching into an eternity. The easel swayed. The miniature began to slide. A small gasp rippled through the onlookers. Alara didn't think. There was no conscious decision, only instinct. The primal drive of a restorer, a guardian of art, ignited within her. She lunged. Her body moved faster than her mind, a cold current electrifying her veins. She shoved aside an elderly gentleman who blocked her path, feeling his surprised grunt, and stretched her arm out, her fingers splaying. Her fingertips grazed the ebony frame just as it teetered off the easel. The dry click, as she caught it, sounded like a gunshot in the sudden, absolute silence of the room. A collective sigh of relief swept through the crowd. The assistant, pale and trembling, snatched the painting from Alara's grasp. "Miss Vance, what in heaven's name was that?" The auctioneer shrieked, his face contorted in an angry grimace at the interruption. Marcus Thorne spun around, his eyes like daggers, filled with utter contempt. "Vance, are you trying to sabotage your own assets now, you desperate fool?" A surge of fury, hot and fierce, erupted within Alara. "I was saving it from being destroyed by your incompetence and his greed," she retorted, her voice shaking but resolute, her finger pointing directly at Thorne. In that charged silence, amidst the minor chaos and the 100 pairs of eyes fixed on her, Alara felt another gaze. One devoid of pity or contempt. It was observation. Cold, sharp, and utterly unreadable. It emanated from the very back of the room, from a shadowed corner where the light dared not fully penetrate. She turned her head, and that was the first time she saw him. Dante Volkov. He sat on a dark leather chair, almost merging with the deeper shadows. He was a living sculpture of latent power. Around 40, his dark hair was meticulously swept back, revealing a high forehead and sharply chiseled cheekbones. An immaculately tailored black suit hugged his broad shoulders, utterly devoid of a single crease, exuding an air of arrogant luxury. There was nothing ostentatious about him, no garish tie, no superfluous accessories. His presence was like a low, resonant hum, not loud but overriding every other sound in the room, demanding attention without asking for it. His eyes. That was the first thing Alara noticed, and they seared themselves into her mind. Black, bottomless, like twin abysses. They didn't merely glance at her. They settled, weighed, as if dissecting every millimeter of her being, every minute tremor of her soul. There was no surprise, no judgment, just a perfect chill, a contained power that made Alara's breath catch in her throat. A faint scar traced a path along his sharp jawline, a testament to battles fought and won, an indelible mark of a dangerous past. His face was an unreadable mask, yet every line conveyed a quiet, lethal menace. Alara felt a cold current ripple down her spine. It wasn't attraction. It was raw, primal instinct, like a doe sensing the presence of a predator. She had faced many powerful men, but none had possessed this overwhelming aura, this complete dominion, simply through a look. The auctioneer, flustered, attempted to regain control, his voice trembling slightly as he felt the heavy silence emanating from back. Ahem. Yes, apologies for the slight interruption. We shall proceed. Bids for the miniature, please. But Dante's voice cut through the strained air, low, resonant, and utterly undeniable, slicing through the auctioneer's spiel like a honed blade. I'll buy it. The auctioneer startled, turning awkwardly towards Dante. Sir, you wish to bid on this miniature? Dante didn't answer directly. His gaze remained locked on Alara, but his words rang out clearly, each syllable imbued with the weight of billions of dollars and absolute authority. I'll buy the entire gallery. A stunned gasp erupted through the room. The entire gallery. It was an unbelievable offer, an act of sheer, breathtaking arrogance. Marcus Thorne, whose smug grin had been fixed moments earlier, stiffened, his face draining of color. "What?" he roared, his voice cracking with outrage. "Mr. Volkov, this is an auction for individual items, not an opportunity to acquire the entire property." Dante finally shifted his gaze from Alara, sweeping over Thorne with a dismissive, glacial look. "Everything has its price, Mr. Thorne," he said, each word a dropping icicle. "You've put this entire establishment on the block. I am merely making an offer." He didn't elaborate, but his silence was more terrifying than any direct threat. He extended a hand, casually placing a thick, unmarked envelope on the table before him. One of the men accompanying him, tall and silent to the shadow, stepped forward, placing a sleek black briefcase on the floor. The soft click of the latches was barely audible, yet it conjured vivid images of what lay within. The auctioneer's face was ashen. He glanced at the envelope, then at Thorne's furious, sputtering face, and finally, his gaze returned to Dante, filled with a mixture of terror and grudging deference. "Mr. Volkov, the amount in here." Dante nodded almost imperceptibly. "Enough to clear all debts, and then some. Enough to acquire undisputed ownership of every item within these walls, and the very ground it stands upon." His voice was low, devoid of emotion, yet his words carried the crushing weight of a monarch declaring sovereignty. Alara stood, utterly paralyzed. She felt every sound around her recede, the entire room seeming to spin. She had expected to witness the end of the Vance Atelier, but she had never envisioned a scene such as this. A stranger, a billionaire mafia boss, had stepped in, not to bid on trinkets, but to purchase her entire existence. Dante's eyes sought hers once more, trapping her within his impenetrable gaze. This time, there was a flicker of something new in those obsidian depths, not satisfaction, not triumph, but a cold, undeniable possessiveness, a promise that resonated with both salvation and doom. She couldn't tell if it was hope or pure dread that surged through her chest. On one hand, the gallery was saved. On the other, it had fallen into the hands of a new devil, one far more dangerous and enigmatic than Marcus Thorne. Humiliated, bankrupt, and now irrevocably entangled in the world of a man she had, in a single glance, instinctively known to avoid. His salvation was not a gift, but a gleaming, perilous new set of chains. The auction room had dissolved into a maelstrom of whispers and frantic phone calls, but for Alara, the world had shrunk to the space between her and Dante Volkov. Marcus Thorne stood frozen, his face a mask of bewildered rage, utterly overshadowed by the dark, unyielding presence that had just seized victory. The auctioneer, still clutching his gavel, looked like a deer caught in headlights, unsure how to proceed with this unprecedented, almost illegal transaction. But Dante, seemingly oblivious to the chaos he'd ignited, focused solely on Alara. His black eyes, devoid of warmth, were a silent, relentless interrogation. "The Vance Atelier is mine now, Miss Vance," Dante stated, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the suddenly hushed air. He hadn't asked. He had declared. And with it comes its liabilities. His gaze swept over her, an assessment that stripped away her defenses. Alara's breath hitched. She felt like an object, not a person, laid bare for his inspection. "I don't need your help," Alara retorted, her voice trembling despite her fierce resolve. Defiance, sharp and desperate, surged through her. "The gallery is my family's. It's not for sale, not to you, not like this." Her chin lifted, a desperate attempt to assert her autonomy against his overwhelming power. The cold dread in her stomach warred with a burning, impotent fury. He had swooped in not as a knight, but as a hawk claiming its prey, albeit a very expensive one. Dante's lips curved, a faint, chilling smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It was already sold, Miss Vance. You simply weren't the buyer. No, you're not even the seller. Consider this a hostile takeover, but with a silver lining. I will clear your father's debts. I will ensure he receives the best medical care money can buy. And your precious portrait," he paused, his eyes flicking to the hidden office door, a detail that sent a fresh jolt of fear through her. How did he know about the portrait? "Will remain untouched. Under my protection." The word protection hung in the air, a silken noose. Alara's mind raced. He knew about her father. He knew about the portrait. This wasn't a random act of generosity. This was calculated. She was being offered salvation, but at what cost? The thought of her father finally being safe, The crushing weight of medical bills lifted was a seductive whisper in her mind. But the thought of owing this man anything, of being bound to his dark world, was terrifying. "And what do you want in return?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, laced with suspicion. "My soul." Dante's smile widened, a fleeting, dangerous flash of teeth. "Souls are far too messy, Miss Vance. I deal in tangible assets. You will be my curator for the Vance Atelier, which will be revitalized under my direction. And you will reside where I deem appropriate for your safety." His eyes intensified, an unspoken warning. "Until I decide otherwise." Alara shook her head, a violent shudder passing through her. "No, I won't be imprisoned. I won't be controlled." The thought of giving up her freedom, even for her family, was unbearable. She had fought tooth and nail for every shred of independence she had left. "You misunderstand," Dante said, his voice dropping, carrying an undeniable edge of steel. "You were already imprisoned, Miss Vance. By debt, by fear, by a man who would have delighted in crushing you piece by piece. I am merely exchanging one cage for another. A gilded one, perhaps, and safer." He turned to his silent, formidable men. "Handle the details. Ensure Mr. Thorne understands the new ownership clearly." The last word was a cold command, and the two men moved with silent, predatory efficiency towards Thorne, who finally seemed to grasp the full extent of his defeat, his face paling to an unhealthy shade of gray. Alara felt a desperate need to escape, to run from this man and his terrifying generosity. But where would she go? Thorne would still be after her, now with even more venom, fueled by his humiliation. Her father's bills wouldn't disappear. She was truly cornered. The next few days were a blur of escalating terror. Marcus Thorne, though visibly shaken by Dante's intervention, wasn't one to give up easily. He launched a smear campaign against Alara in local tabloids, accusing her of financial mismanagement and even embezzlement, trying to paint her as a fraud. The few remaining art collectors who had shown lukewarm interest in her small, desperate solo exhibitions pulled out. Anonymous threats started appearing, menacing notes tucked under the gallery door, unsettling phone calls where only heavy breathing was heard. One evening, as Alara walked home, a shadowy figure followed her for several blocks, making her heart pound like a drum against her ribs, her breath catching in ragged gasps. She clutched her keys like a weapon, her fingers numb with fear. The worst came when she received a chilling, anonymous photograph. It was of her father in his hospital bed, his face pale and fragile. A red circle had been crudely drawn around his head. A single ominous word scrawled across the back, "Next." That was the breaking point. The photo dropped from her trembling fingers. Her knees buckled, and she slid down the cold, dust-covered wall of the gallery, sobbing, utterly defeated. All her fierce defiance crumbled into dust. She couldn't protect him. She couldn't protect anyone. She was truly, utterly alone, facing a monster she couldn't fight. She didn't call Dante. He called her. His voice, when it came through the phone, was devoid of emotion, yet carried an undercurrent of something lethal. "You received the message, Miss Vance. It wasn't a question. Are you ready to accept my terms?" Alara could barely speak through her choked sobs. "Yes," she whispered, the word a bitter taste on her tongue, the sound of her surrender. "Yes, just protect him. Please." "He's already being protected," Dante stated, his tone firm. "My men are at his facility. From this moment, no one touches him. And no one touches you." A strange wave of relief, cold and sharp, washed over her, chilling her to the bone even as it eased the suffocating panic. She was safe. He had already acted. "Pack a bag, Miss Vance. My car will be there in 30 minutes. You will be residing at my penthouse. Effective immediately." The command was absolute. There was no room for discussion. 30 minutes later, a sleek black sedan, so dark it seemed to absorb the streetlights, pulled up outside the desolate gallery. Two hulking men in dark suits, their faces impassive, emerged and quietly took the small duffel bag she had packed. Alara took one last look at the Vance Atelier, its dark windows reflecting her own defeated face. She was leaving it behind, leaving her life behind. The drive was silent, punctuated only by the soft hum of the powerful engine and the frantic beat of Alara's heart. She was escorted into a penthouse that defied description. It was high above the city, a glass and steel sanctuary that felt more like a fortress. The air was cool, smelling faintly of expensive leather and something clean, almost sterile, a stark contrast to the old gallery. Dante was waiting for her in a vast living area, overlooking the glittering expanse of Manhattan. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a silhouette of power against the city lights. He hadn't changed clothes since the auction, still in his immaculate black suit. He turned as she entered, his gaze sweeping over her, assessing her vulnerability. "Welcome, Malera," he said, using her first name for the first time, making it sound like a claim. "This is your new reality." He gestured to a series of doors. "You have your own wing. Your privacy will be respected, within reason. There are guards at every entrance, every exit. You will not leave this penthouse without my direct permission and never unescorted. You will have access to everything you need, but your communication will be monitored. These are not requests, Alara. These are rules. Break them, and the protection I offer dissipates. Understand." Alara felt the bitter taste of captivity. "I understand," she murmured, her voice hollow. Her autonomy, her freedom, her very self felt like a cage being slowly, irrevocably locked. Yet, paradoxically, for the first time in weeks, the suffocating grip of fear for her father had loosened. She was trapped, but perhaps, just perhaps, she was also safe. Dante stepped closer, his presence utterly dominating the expansive room. He stopped just inches from her, forcing her to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. His eyes, dark as the deepest midnight, held hers. "Good," he said, the word a low, resonant rumble that sent a shiver down her spine. "Because now, Alara, your life belongs to me." The air in Dante Volkov's penthouse was impossibly clean, almost sterile, a stark contrast to the dust-laden, history-steeped scent of the Vance Atelier. It smelled of expensive leather, polished marble, and a faint, masculine cologne that clung to the silence like an invisible shroud. Alara spent her first few days in a state of suspended disbelief, a prisoner in a gilded cage that felt more suffocating than any prison cell. The sheer opulence of the penthouse was overwhelming. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying panorama of Manhattan, a glittering tapestry of lights she could no longer truly experience. Plush, silent carpets absorbed her footsteps, making her feel like a ghost gliding through rooms she had no right to occupy. The guards, always present, always discreet, moved like shadows, their gazes impassive, yet she felt their constant, unwavering surveillance. Every single action, every breath felt observed. Her wing was a symphony of muted tones and exquisite textures. A king-size bed, its sheets silkier than anything she'd ever touched, felt too vast, too empty. The ensuite bathroom was a spa, stocked with lotions and soaps that cost more than her monthly budget. Food, prepared by an invisible staff, appeared silently, exquisitely plated, but tasted like ash in her mouth. She wandered through the expansive rooms, her fingers brushing against priceless sculptures, original paintings, a private collection that rivaled small museums. This was a world built on power and limitless wealth, a world she had unwittingly stumbled into, a world that now owned her. Frustration was a constant, dull throb behind her eyes, the feeling of being stripped of her autonomy, her purpose. She was safe, yes, her father was safe, but at what immeasurable personal cost? She occasionally caught glimpses of Dante Volkov in his element. His office, a minimalist fortress of dark wood and gleaming glass, often hummed with a low murmur of voices. Men, sharp-suited and grave, moved in and out, their briefcases clutched tight. She never lingered, but snippets of conversation sometimes drifted down the corridor, words like acquisition, leverage, restructuring, market dominance. His voice, when she heard it, was always calm, measured, devoid of emotional inflection, yet it carried an undeniable weight of authority, a chilling echo of absolute command. She saw the ruthlessness in his posture, in the way his jaw would subtly clench, in the cold, assessing gleam of his eyes. This was a man who moved mountains, crushed rivals, and built empires, all with an unnerving, silent efficiency. It reinforced her fear, deepened her distrust. This wasn't just a rich art collector. This was a force of nature, untamed and dangerous. Yet there were subtle contradictions. One afternoon, a delivery arrived, not just a box of clothes, exquisitely tailored and in her size, another reminder of his absolute control, knowing her measurements without asking, but also a collection of rare art history books, first editions she'd only dreamed of. They weren't left with a note, no grand gesture, just placed silently on the coffee table in her sitting room. She opened one, the faint, sweet scent of aged paper filling her nostrils, and recognized a treatise on Baroque restoration methods she'd been searching for years. Was this a gift? Or a calculated move to ensure she remained useful, a way to keep her intellect sharp yet contained? She couldn't tell. Security was omnipresent. She saw his men. Always. In the hallways, outside her door, even on the rarely used private elevator. They were silent, watchful, like extensions of Dante himself. One morning, she tried to venture beyond the penthouse's designated private areas, drawn by the faint sound of music from a floor below. A tall, impeccably dressed man, whose name she didn't know, materialized instantly, blocking her path without a word. His hand, heavy and unyielding, gently but firmly guided her back towards her wing. "Mr. Volkov prefers you remain in your designated area, Miss Vance," he stated, his voice devoid of menace, yet utterly final. She knew then, with a chilling certainty, that her protection was also her imprisonment. Dante's personal interactions were sparse, yet potent. He would occasionally join her for dinner in the expansive dining room, a silent, imposing figure at the head of the table. The clinking of silverware, the soft rustle of expensive fabrics were the only sounds as they ate, surrounded by vast, empty space. His gaze would often drift to her, lingering, analytical. One evening, he pointed to a subtle discoloration on a landscape painting hanging opposite them. "Do you think that particular pigment is historically accurate for the period?" he asked, his voice low. Alara, surprised by the unexpected question, found herself launched into a detailed explanation of Restoration-era dyes. He listened, not with polite tolerance, but with genuine, quiet attention, his dark eyes fixed on her, absorbing every word. When she finished, he simply nodded. "Interesting. I concur." It was a small moment, yet it chipped away at her monolithic perception of him. This man, this terrifyingly powerful man, possessed a surprising intellect, a connoisseur's eye she hadn't expected. Her defiant sparks, though dampened, were not extinguished. "I need access to my restoration equipment," she declared one morning after a week of restless wandering. "The atelier has delicate pieces that require specific environmental controls. I cannot simply abandon them." Dante, who had been reviewing documents at a small ornate desk in the living room, slowly looked up. His eyes met hers, unwavering. "The atelier is being handled," he said, his voice even. "My men are overseeing its transition. New climate control systems are being installed. It is being prepared for my collection, but I need to be there. I am the only one who knows the specifics of certain pieces," Alara insisted, stepping closer, frustration making her bold. "You can't just move everything like a chess piece." He rose, slowly, fluidly, his height suddenly dominating the space between them. The air crackled with a silent tension. His scent, that clean, masculine musk, enveloped her. "Everything is a chess piece, Alara," he murmured, his voice soft, yet chillingly firm. "And I assure you, I have an excellent understanding of every piece on my board, including yours." He reached out, his long fingers gently, deliberately, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was feather-light, yet it sent an unexpected jolt through her, a tremor that had nothing to do with fear. Her pulse leaped, hammering against her ribs. "You are under my care. Your skills will be utilized here, in my collection. Your safety is paramount. Nothing else matters." His touch lingered, too long, too intimate. His thumb brushed against the delicate curve of her earlobe, sending a shiver through her. Alara held her breath, unable to move, unable to break eye contact. The proximity, the sheer, undeniable presence of him, was both terrifying and strangely captivating. She saw the minute lines at the corners of his eyes, the subtle flexing of his jaw. He was a man of immense control, yet there was a raw, primal energy emanating from him that was deeply unsettling. A dangerous yearning, a forbidden curiosity, began to unfurl in the pit of her stomach, warring fiercely with her ingrained distrust. Later that evening, as she sat alone in her expansive, silent wing, she found herself tracing the path his thumb had taken on her ear. She was frustrated, deeply resentful of her captivity, but also undeniably aware of him, of the man who had effortlessly dismantled her world and then just as effortlessly rebuilt a new, secure one around her. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but was now laced with something else, a budding curiosity, a reluctant fascination, and an unsettling physical awareness that she wouldn't acknowledge. She was safe. Her father was safe. She had everything money could buy. Yet she was also completely alone, completely controlled. Her gaze drifted to the vast, glittering city outside her window. She saw the familiar skyline, the distant lights of her old life, now separated by an unbridgeable chasm. She missed the grit, the struggle, the sheer freedom of it. But then a thought, chillingly seductive, whispered in her mind. Was she truly free before? Or was she merely drowning, protected by nothing but her own increasingly fragile hope? A soft knock on her door startled her. One of Dante's silent guards stood there, holding a small, silver tray. "Mr. Volkov requests your presence in the private study, Miss Vance. He wishes to discuss your duties regarding his personal collection." Immediately, Alara's heart gave a sudden, hard thump. Her duties, her purpose, here in his world. The offer was a command. The discussion would be an order. But it was also a glimmer of something she craved, to touch art again, to feel useful. As she rose, a strange blend of dread and anticipation tightened her stomach. She was a pawn on his chessboard, yes, but a pawn could sometimes become a queen. Life within Dante's penthouse settled into a strange, unsettling rhythm. Alara spent her days immersed in Dante's extensive personal art collection, a treasure trove of masterpieces hidden from public view. The work itself was a lifeline, a familiar comfort in an alien world. Her fingers, accustomed to the delicate touch of aged canvases and the precise handling of restoration tools, found solace in the textures of oils, the weight of bronze. She would lose herself for hours in the intricate details of a forgotten master, the faint smell of old varnish a nostalgic balm to her anxious spirit. Yet, even here, surrounded by beauty, the invisible chains of Dante's control were ever present. Guards moved like ghosts, their presence a constant hum beneath the surface of her new, opulent reality. Every call she made, every email she sent, few as they were, she knew were monitored. Her freedom had been traded for safety, a bargain she resented with every fiber of her being, yet one she couldn't deny the necessity of. Her father, she was assured, was well, receiving the finest care. Her calls to him were brief, carefully orchestrated, his voice sounding stronger, less weary than before. That knowledge, that deep, fundamental relief, was the anchor that kept her from shattering completely. But even with that solace, a profound sense of isolation gnawed at her. She often found herself staring out at the dazzling city lights, a silent, glittering expanse she could see but not touch, a world that was hers no longer. Then the first tremor. It began subtly, an insidious whisper that snaked its way into her gilded cage. A society gossip column slipped almost surreptitiously onto her breakfast tray, caught her eye. The headline, stark and venomous, screamed, "Art fraud in the atelier? Mystery woman behind Vance collapse." The article, pinned with a particularly nasty flourish, accused Alara of mismanaging gallery funds, orchestrating fraudulent sales, and driving her family's legacy into ruin. It painted her as a conniving opportunist who abandoned her dying father and now sought refuge with a shadowy benefactor. The words, printed in black and white, felt like a physical blow. Shame, hot and stinging, flooded her. Her reputation, all she had left besides her art, was being systematically dismantled. Her hands trembled, crumpling the paper. She could almost hear Marcus Thorne's sneering laughter, his satisfaction at seeing her publicly disgraced. He was relentless, a cockroach that refused to die. Despite Dante's towering presence, Thorne was still out there, pulling strings, using his influence to poison her name. The walls of the penthouse, once symbols of protection, suddenly felt like a transparent cage, exposing her to a vicious public glare. Before she could process the full impact, a second, far more chilling threat materialized. A nurse, a new, nervous-looking woman, answered her call to the nursing home. "Miss Vance, your father, he had a visitor today." Her voice was low, laced with fear. "A man? He just sat there. Didn't say much. Just looked at your father. And then he said, 'Tell Alara to think about the consequences of new partnerships.' Then he left." The nurse quickly added, "He looked very intimidating, Miss Vance." Your father seemed unsettled. Alara's blood ran cold. The phone clattered against the marble table. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a wild, terrified beat. Thorne. It had to be Thorne. He hadn't just threatened her reputation. He had dared to step into the sanctuary of her father's fragile existence. Her father, innocent and vulnerable, was being used as a pawn in this twisted game. The antiseptic scent of the hospital, usually a distant memory, suddenly filled her senses, mingling with the metallic tang of fear in her mouth. She could almost feel the cold dread gripping her father's hand, the tremor of his fragile body. A wave of pure, unadulterated terror washed over her, making her dizzy. All the luxury, all the guards, all the promises of safety from Dante felt utterly inadequate in that moment. Her father was exposed. She was exposed. The very thought of him suffering because of her choices, because of her forced alliance with Dante, was a torture far worse than any physical pain. The desperation she had thought was gone, buried under layers of reluctant gratitude, resurfaced with a vengeance. She was still just Alara, a woman ill-equipped to fight the monsters in Thorne's world or Dante's. A subtle shift in air. The faint, expensive scent of Dante's cologne. She hadn't heard him enter, a silent phantom. He stood in the doorway of her sitting room, his gaze sweeping from the crumpled newspaper on the table to her ashen face. His black eyes, usually unreadable, held a dangerous, simmering intensity. He knew. Of course he knew. Nothing escaped him in this fortress. Thorne is insolent, Dante stated, his voice a low growl that resonated through the room, sending a shiver through Alara. He didn't ask if she'd seen the article or heard the threat. He simply confirmed it. Alara found her voice a broken whisper. My father. He went to my father. He used my father. Her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. You said you would protect him. You said no one would touch him. Dante's jaw tightened, a muscle flexing under his smooth skin. He moved then, a predator's stride, covering the distance between them in a few silent steps. He stopped inches from her, his sheer presence overwhelming. Alara instinctively recoiled, a mix of fear and a strange, primal relief stirring within her. And no one will, Dante said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, almost inaudible register. His eyes, fixed on hers, were now cold, hard chips of obsidian. Thorne has mistaken my generosity for weakness. He has made a grave error. He has touched what is mine. The word mine was a possessive declaration, chilling in its absolute certainty. Alara stared up at him, her heart thrumming. She saw the true, unbridled fury in his eyes, a cold, calculating rage that promised utter destruction. It wasn't the anger of a businessman. It was the wrath of a predator whose territory had been violated. A shiver, both of terror and a strange, unsettling security, ran through her. Dante didn't waste words. He pulled out his phone, making a single terse call. His back was to her, but she could hear the clipped, decisive commands. Deal with Thorne. Publicly. Irreversibly. Ensure he understands the cost of touching my property. The last word was a brutal emphasis, clearly referring to her. And send a team to the hospital. Double the guard. No one gets within 50 feet of Mr. Vance without my direct authorization. If they even breathe near him, they answer to me. The call ended as abruptly as it began. He turned back to Alara, his expression now impassive, but the dangerous glint still lingering in his eyes. It is handled, Alara. Handled, she echoed, her voice still shaky. What does that mean? What did you do? It means Marcus Thorne will learn a lesson he will not soon forget, Dante said, his voice quiet, almost gentle, which only made it more terrifying. And your father is now surrounded by men who would die before letting anyone harm him. As are you. He reached out, his long fingers gently cupping her jaw, forcing her to meet his gaze. His thumb brushed over her cheekbone, a surprisingly soft, possessive touch that sent another jolt through her. No one touches what belongs to me, Alara. No one. His touch was a strange mixture of comfort and terrifying control. Alara felt a profound shock at his calculated ruthlessness, the sheer, unapologetic brutality of his methods. Her moral compass spun wildly. This was wrong. This was dangerous. But beneath the shock, a deep, primal part of her, exhausted from weeks of fear and vulnerability, felt an unexpected, absolute sense of safety. She was horrified, yet undeniably, terrifyingly protected. Dante Volkov was a monster, yes, but he was her monster, and he had just unleashed hell to protect what he claimed as his own. The phone on the coffee table buzzed. It was a news alert. Alara instinctively reached for it, her fingers still trembling. The news alert on Alara's phone had confirmed it all. Not a subtle whisper, but a public, deafening roar. Marcus Thorne's real estate conglomerate was facing a sudden, devastating audit from a previously unknown government agency, crippling his current projects. Key investors were pulling out, citing unforeseen legal entanglements. In the damning blow images leaked anonymously, a Thorne meeting with known figures from less than reputable circles, effectively shattering his carefully cultivated public image. It was swift, brutal, and undeniably Dante's handiwork. The sheer, terrifying efficiency of his retribution had left Alara breathless, a mix of horror and a perverse, unsettling admiration swirling within her. She retreated to her private wing, the opulent rooms now feeling less like a cage and more like a bunker in the wake of the storm. The news played silently on the large flat-screen television, flashing headlines about Thorne's sudden downfall. Alara's own name was cleared, buried under the avalanche of scandal, now engulfing her former tormentor. She was safe. Her father was safe. But the cost was her innocence, her belief in a world governed by rules she understood. Dante had moved mountains, but had also shown her the terrifying, absolute power of his shadow world. That evening, the penthouse was quieter than usual. Even the city hummed with a different resonance, as if acknowledging the shift in power. Alara found herself drawn to Dante's personal study, not out of obedience, but a strange, compelling curiosity. She needed to understand the man who wielded such terrifying force. The door was ajar, a sliver of warm light spilling into the cool hallway. Hesitantly, she pushed it open. Dante sat at his massive dark wood desk, not engaged in frantic calls or reviewing documents, but simply staring at a small, framed photograph. The soft glow of a single desk lamp illuminated his profile, casting long shadows that softened the sharp lines of his jaw, the usual formidable mask momentarily lowered. He looked tired. Not physically exhausted, but deeply, profoundly weary, as if the weight of his empire, of his decisions, rested heavily on his shoulders. The scent of aged leather, ink, and that familiar, expensive cologne was stronger here, wrapping around her. "Dante," she murmured, her voice a hesitant breath in the hushed room. He didn't startle. His head slowly turned, his dark eyes meeting hers. There was no flicker of surprise, no irritation, only a deep, contemplative gaze. "Alara," he acknowledged, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, softer than she'd ever heard it. He didn't invite her in, but he didn't dismiss her either. She stepped further into the room, drawn by the unusual vulnerability radiating from him. The photograph he held was small, an antique. As she approached, she saw it, a faded sepia-toned image of a young woman, strikingly beautiful, with soft, kind eyes that somehow reminded Alara of her own grandmother. She wore a simple dress, her dark hair pulled back, a faint, melancholic smile playing on her lips. Behind her, a dilapidated stone building with crumbling arches, overgrown with ivy. It looked like an old, forgotten chapel, or perhaps a ruined villa. "Who is she?" Alara asked, her voice hushed, instinctively knowing this was a sacred, private moment. Dante's gaze remained fixed on the photograph. "My mother," he replied, the words spoken with a reverence that cracked through his usual impenetrable facade. And that, he gestured with a long, elegant finger to the building in the background, was her dream, an old, abandoned chapel in Sicily. She wanted to restore it, turn it into a sanctuary for those who needed beauty in their lives. His voice, for the first time, held a tremor of something raw and deeply personal. Alara felt a pang of empathy, sharp and unexpected. This ruthless man, this Mafia boss billionaire, had once had a mother with a dream of beauty and sanctuary. What happened? Dante finally looked at her, his dark eyes still distant, haunted. She never got the chance. The world took her. Too soon. He didn't elaborate, but the unspoken story hung heavy in the air, a tale of loss, violence, and perhaps a brutal initiation into the dark world he now commanded. The scar on his jaw, usually a mark of strength, now seemed like a permanent wound, a testament to a pain he carried silently. "I'm so sorry," Alara whispered genuinely. She understood loss. She understood the crushing weight of unfinished dreams, of legacies cut short. She had fought to preserve her own family's dream, just as his mother had dreamed of restoring her chapel. A delicate thread of understanding, fragile yet potent, began to weave between them. Dante's gaze sharpened, focusing on her, pulling her back from the precipice of his past. She believed that beauty could save people, that art could be a refuge. He set the photograph down carefully, turning it face down, as if protecting its fragile memory from the harsh light of his reality. I used to think that was naive. That power was the only refuge. He paused, his eyes sweeping over her, a slow, intense assessment. Until you. You fought for a miniature, Alara. You risked your life, not for profit, but for the inherent worth of a forgotten painting. He rose slowly, his presence once again filling the room, but this time, it felt less like an imposition and more like a magnetic field. He walked around the desk, stopping before her. The subtle scent of his cologne, clean and dark, enveloped her, drawing her deeper into his orbit. You show me that sometimes beauty is worth fighting for. Worth turning my world upside down for. Alara's heart pounded, a frantic drum against her ribs. The raw honesty in his voice, the unexpected glimpse into his burdened soul, shattered her preconceived notions of him. He wasn't just a monster. He was a broken man, carrying his own profound wounds, who had found a twisted, brutal way to protect what little beauty he now allowed himself to see. He reached out, his hand gently lifting her chin, forcing her eyes to meet his. His touch was warm, surprisingly tender, yet utterly possessive. When Thorn threatened your father, when he tried to disgrace you, it was more than an inconvenience, Alara. It was a violation. My mother, she was taken because I couldn't protect her. Because I wasn't powerful enough then. But you are different. His thumb stroked her jawline, a delicate possessive caress that sent shivers down her spine, igniting a dangerous, forbidden heat deep within her. You walk into my world, and you refuse to break. You remind me of things I thought I had buried. And because of that, because you matter in a way I hadn't allowed anything to matter in decades, you are now inextricably linked to me, to my life, to my protection. Alara's breath hitched. She was acutely aware of his eyes, dark and intense, of the subtle shift in the air, electric with unspoken desires. The fear of commitment, of losing her entire identity, warred fiercely with a growing, reluctant attraction, a dangerous yearning for the absolute security he offered. You are not just my curator, Alara, he continued, his voice low, a deep rumble that vibrated through her very bones. You are more. You are the missing piece in this intricate, messy canvas I call my life. And I will not lose you. Not to Thorn, not to anyone. Your place is here by my side. Permanently. The word permanently hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications, with a future she hadn't dared to imagine. It was a declaration, an expectation, a possessive promise. She was no longer just his employee, she was integral to his very being, to the complex machinery of his dark empire. He wasn't asking. He was claiming. Alara's mind reeled. Acceptance of his world, of his dark protective nature, was no longer a choice, but an unfolding reality. Her heart ached with the weight of her fears, but also with a strange, fierce connection, a magnetic pull towards this dangerous, vulnerable man. He had offered her safety, a future for her father, and now a place by his side. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. And she knew with a chilling certainty that she was no longer merely a pawn in his game. She was the queen. The fragile piece within Dante's penthouse had become a gilded deception. Alara, despite the growing intimacy, the shared vulnerabilities, and the undeniable pull towards Dante, still chafed under the absolute, unwavering control he exerted. His possessiveness, once a terrifying comfort, now felt like a silken net tightening around her. She found herself yearning for the simple freedom of walking down a street without an escort, of making a decision without tacit approval. Her art, her passion was still her refuge, but even that now served his collection, his vision. She was cherished, protected, and loved in a way she hadn't dared dream, yet she was also an object in his immaculate, formidable world. The contrast simmered within her, a quiet, restless spark of defiance that Dante, in his absolute confidence, seemed to overlook. The crisp autumn morning air, usually invigorating, felt suffocating through the penthouse's sealed windows. Alara sat, ostensibly reviewing a complex restoration proposal for a Renaissance fresco Dante had recently acquired, but her mind was elsewhere. Her gaze kept drifting to a new art periodical delivered that morning, carelessly left open on her reading table. An article, highlighted with an anonymous crude marker, detailed a new initiative by the city's historical society to preserve forgotten artistic legacies, specifically, a series of crumbling murals depicting local history located in an old abandoned civic center downtown. The article made a pointed, almost accusatory mention of the Vance Atelier's recent acquisition by a mysterious private collector, implying that genuine art preservation was being overshadowed by private greed. Beneath the article, scribbled in shaky, almost illegible handwriting that strangely resembled her father's, was a single, desperate plea. Alara, the murals. Don't let them vanish like everything else. Vance Legacy. Meet. Old Civic Center. Noon. A cold knot tightened in Alara's stomach. Her father. The handwriting was too familiar, too raw with emotion, to be a coincidence. But how could he know about this particular initiative? And how could he have gotten a message to her past Dante's impenetrable security? Her mind raced, a whirlwind of doubt and desperate hope. It had to be a trap. It felt like a trap. But the idea that her father, frail and ill, might be reaching out, might be relying on her to save another piece of their shared legacy, it tore at her. He had mentioned these murals years ago, wistfully, as undiscovered treasures. This was exactly the kind of preservation work he had always dreamed of. Her first instinct was to go to Dante to show him the note. But the words, "Don't let them vanish like everything else," echoed in her mind. It was a veiled accusation, a bitter lament at the loss of the Vance Atelier. She could almost hear her father's disappointment. And the phrase Vance Legacy was a direct appeal to her deepest values, her identity that felt so threatened under Dante's possessive gaze. Could she trust Dante with his ruthless, acquisitive nature to genuinely care about forgotten murals in a crumbling civic center? Or would he see them as mere assets, to be bought, sold, or even ignored? A spark of old defiance, long suppressed, flared within her. She was Alara Vance, not merely Dante Volkov's curator, not merely his protected possession. She had her own judgment, her own loyalties. She had to investigate, if only to confirm her suspicions, to understand if this was truly a plea from her father or a twisted ploy. But more importantly, she felt a desperate, almost reckless need to prove, even to herself, that she could still act independently, that she wasn't completely owned. She glanced at the expensive, silent clock on the wall. Almost 11 a.m. Noon was rapidly approaching. Dante was in a meeting in his soundproofed office, his guards stationed discreetly around the penthouse. This was her window. With trembling hands, Alara wrote a hurried note, her pen scratching against the thick paper of Dante's monogram stationery. Gone to verify source regarding Vance Legacy. Crucial. Will return. It was vague, defiant, and intentionally omitted any mention of her destination. She left it conspicuously on her desk, a small act of rebellion, a desperate plea for understanding, perhaps, but also a deliberate breach of his rules. She then chose the most innocuous exit, the service elevator leading to the loading dock, a route less frequently monitored by Dante's most trusted guards, who were usually focused on the main residential entrance. She wore a simple dark coat and sunglasses, hoping to blend in with the busy city streets below. The cold autumn wind immediately bit at her exposed skin as she emerged from the loading dock, a jolt of harsh reality after the controlled climate of the penthouse. The city noise, once distant, now assaulted her ears, the blare of horns, the rumble of traffic, the cacophony of human voices. It felt raw, liberating, and terrifying all at once. She hailed a taxi, giving the address of the old civic center, her heart thumping wildly. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every passing car felt like a potential threat, yet a perverse thrill of self-determination coursed through her veins. The civic center stood forlorn, a skeletal structure of crumbling stone and boarded-up windows amidst a bustling commercial district. It looked exactly as described in the article, a testament to faded glory. The air here was heavy with the damp scent of decay, mildew, and exhaust fumes. The main entrance was sealed, rusted chain across ancient double doors. There was no one around. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the distant city rumble and the creak of rusty metal. "Hello," Alara called out, her voice echoing hollowly through the vacant space. "Is anyone here?" "My father. Did he send a message?" No reply. Only the cold, empty silence. A wave of dread washed over her, chilling her to the bone. This was wrong. Terribly wrong. The note, the urgency, the familiar handwriting. It had all been a meticulously crafted lie. She had walked straight into a trap. Or it had to be him. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadowy archway of a collapsed wing, followed by two burly men. Marcus Thorne. His smirk was wider, more triumphant than ever, his eyes glinting with malicious satisfaction. Well, Thorne purred, his voice dripping with venom. If it isn't Miss Vance. So eager to abandon your gilded cage, are we? So eager to betray your new protector. He gestured to the note she had found, now clutched in his hand. A little personal touch, wouldn't you say? Nothing like exploiting a daughter's love for her ailing father to lure a little bird from its nest. Alara gasped, her blood running cold. She felt a profound wave of despair and self-loathing. She had been so foolish, so naive, so desperate to prove her independence that she had walked straight into his snare. You forged that note. My father. Your father is perfectly safe for now, Thorne interrupted, his smile chilling. But you, Miss Vance, are no longer safe. You are a loose end. A very inconvenient loose end that Mr. Volkov foolishly picked up. He stepped closer, his men flanking him. And now we shall remove you from his chessboard. Permanently. Panic, cold and visceral, seized Alara. She spun around, looking for an escape, but the two men had already moved, blocking her path. No. Let me go, she cried, her voice raw with terror, but it was useless. A rough hand clamped over her mouth, another grabbed her arms, pinning them behind her back. The taste of dust and desperation filled her mouth. She fought, kicked, thrashed, but her struggles were futile against their brute strength. She felt a sharp prick in her neck, a burning sensation, and then a creeping numbness began to spread through her limbs, blurring her vision. Thorne's triumphant face, swimming before her eyes, was the last thing she saw before darkness claimed her. Back at the penthouse, the silence was suddenly deafening to Dante. He had finished his call, the low murmur of Russian words fading from the soundproofed walls of his office. He had expected Alara to be waiting, perhaps feigning interest in his affairs, or buried in one of the art books he provided. But her wing was empty. He walked into her sitting room, the air still faintly carrying the scent of her, that subtle mix of old books and something uniquely feminine. His eyes immediately fell on the desk. The note. His blood ran cold, then simmered to a slow, burning inferno. Gone to verify source regarding Vance's legacy. Crucial. Will return. The words, innocent enough, felt like a slap in the face. She had defied him. She had walked out. Against his direct orders. Against his protection. His rules. The savage rage, cold and absolute, began to unfurl in his chest, tighter and more destructive than any market crash or rival betrayal. He saw the crumpled art periodical, the crudely highlighted article, and a cold, chilling understanding dawned on him. This was Thorne's pathetic attempt at retaliation. But the way Alara had acted, the deliberate secrecy, it wasn't just a trap. It felt like a betrayal. A direct affront to his authority, to his claim, to the unspoken bond that had begun to form between them. A profound sense of personal betrayal, sharper than any blade, pierced through him. He had offered her everything, safety, protection, a place in his world, a glimpse into his guarded past. He had risked his own position, his own carefully constructed image for her. And she had walked away. Like his mother, lured away by dreams, leaving him alone, vulnerable. He remembered the cold emptiness, the helplessness. That feeling, long buried, now resurfaced with devastating force. Gabriel, Dante roared, his voice shaking the very foundations of the penthouse, a sound of raw, unleashed fury rarely heard. Find her. Find her now. And when you do, his voice dropped to a lethal whisper. I want to know why she chose to leave my protection. I want to know everything. His hands clenched, his knuckles white. The fury was an all-consuming fire, but beneath it, a chilling, agonizing fear coiled in his gut. Fear for her, yes, but also fear of what her defiance meant for him. The city, once a glittering tapestry of distant lights viewed from Alara's gilded cage, now loomed as a monstrous, suffocating presence. She awoke to a throbbing ache in her skull, a metallic tang of fear in her mouth, and the unsettling scent of damp concrete and stale cigarette smoke. Her eyes, heavy with the residue of sedatives, struggled to focus. She was in a windowless room, dimly lit by a single bare bulb hanging precariously from a frayed wire. The walls were rough, unpainted cinder blocks, streaked with grime. Her hands were bound roughly behind her back, the coarse rope biting into her wrists. Despair, cold and absolute, washed over her. She was in an abandoned warehouse, far from the polished marble and silent luxury of Dante's penthouse. Marcus Thorne appeared from the shadows, his face illuminated by the flickering bulb, twisted into a triumphant sneer. Awake, little bird. His voice was a grating rasp, laced with malice. Did you really think your Mafia prince would find you so easily? Did you really think you could defy me twice? He stalked closer, his silhouette casting an enormous, menacing shadow over her trembling form. He took my deals. He took my reputation. And you, little curator, you took my revenge. Now I'm taking everything back. Starting with you as bait. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, terrified drum. The sedative still made her limbs heavy, her thoughts sluggish, but the terror was crystal clear. You won't get away with this, she whispered, her voice raw. Thorn laughed, a harsh, dry sound. Oh, but I already have. You ran from him, Alara. You defied his precious rules. He'll either blame himself, or he'll blame you for being such a disobedient little pawn. Either way, you're a liability. And liabilities get disposed of. He took out a small, glinting blade, tracing its edge with a gloved finger. Alara gasped, a silent scream caught in her throat. The cold, hard reality of her situation hit her with shattering force. This wasn't just about art or money. This was about survival. Her survival. And she was utterly alone. Meanwhile, the penthouse had become a command center of terrifying efficiency. Dante, his face a mask of lethal calm, moved with the precision of a predator zeroing in on its prey. The initial, searing rage at Alara's defiance had transmuted into a cold, calculated fury, sharper than any knife. She walked out. She disobeyed. She put herself in harm's way. The thought was a relentless hammer blow to his internal control, yet it was overridden by a more primal, overwhelming imperative. Find her. Protect her. Reclaim what is mine. Gabriel, Dante's loyal enforcer, moved silently, efficiently, orchestrating a ballet of frantic activity. Maps of the city's abandoned industrial zones were projected onto the massive screens in Dante's study, Reddits blinking furiously, tracking known Thorn associates, known hideouts. Phones rang incessantly, each call a new piece of intelligence, a fresh lead. Dante barked orders in a low, guttural Russian, his voice imbued with a dangerous authority that sent shivers down the spines of even his most hardened men. Thorn's men are pulling back from the docks, Gabriel reported, his fingers flying across a keyboard. Moving towards the old Brooklyn Navy Yard. Sector Gamma 7. Dante's eyes narrowed, cold as winter ice. That's his old smuggling route. Predictable. He wants to make her vanish without a trace. He slammed his fist on the desk, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. Foolish. He thinks I won't burn the entire city to find her. His voice, though low, was laced with an unbridled, savage possessiveness that promised utter devastation. Mobilize every unit. Ground. See? Shut down every exit. No one leaves that sector. I want every single one of his men located. If they resist, eliminate them. He grabbed his bespoke blazer, shrugging into it with a fluid, lethal grace. Underneath, the outline of a holstered weapon was visible. I want Thorn brought to me. Alive? He will answer for touching what belongs to Dante Volkov. The last sentence was spoken with a chilling finality that left no room for interpretation. The convoy of black SUVs moved through the city like a silent, deadly serpent. Lights off, engines purring menacingly. Dante sat in the lead vehicle, his gaze fixed on the city blurring past, his mind a labyrinth of strategic calculations and primal rage. He felt Alara's fear, a distant, phantom ache in his own chest. He had brought her into his world, claimed her, protected her. And she had, in her defiant innocence, challenged him. But that challenge was now irrelevant. What mattered was her safety, and the brutal, unequivocal punishment of anyone who dared to threaten it. Alara's world began to swim again, the sedatives dragging her back into a hazy stupor. Thorn was still there, his voice a mocking drone, but his words blended into a terrifying murmur. She felt cold. So cold. Her head lolled against the rough concrete wall. He won't come. He'll think I betrayed him. The thought, laced with self-reproach, was more painful than the ropes biting into her skin. Suddenly, a distant thump. Then another. Like muffled explosions. The faint tremor of the building. Thorn stopped talking, his eyes narrowing, a flicker of unease crossing his face. Then came a shattering sound of glass, not from a window, but from a reinforced door on the far side of the warehouse. A blinding flash of light, followed by a deafening bang. Gunfire. Screams. The warehouse, once silent and foreboding, erupted into a cacophony of violence. Thorne cursed, pulling out a pistol. They found us. Get her ready. We moved, but it was too late. Figures in black, moving with unnatural speed and precision, swarmed into the cavernous space. They were Dante's men, a silent, deadly force. They moved like ghosts, each shot precise, each movement lethal. Alara watched, numb with terror and a dawning, bewildered hope, as Thorne's guards fell, one by one, without a sound. And then Dante. He appeared in the chaos like a dark, avenging angel, his presence instantly dominating the brutal scene. His immaculate suit was still perfect, but his eyes were blazing with a raw, savage intensity Alara had never witnessed. He held a silenced pistol, its glint cold and lethal. He didn't waste a single glance on the unfolding battle. His gaze, sharp and relentless, swept the room, searching. His eyes found her. In that instant, everything else faded. The gunfire, the screams, the crashing sounds, all became a distant hum. Alara saw his face, stripped of its usual control, contorted by a mixture of profound relief and unbridled fury. He moved towards her, a force of nature, utterly unstoppable. His pace was relentless, his dark eyes never leaving her. Thorne, desperate, lunged for Alara, pulling her up, pressing the blade against her throat. Stop, or she dies, he shrieked, his voice laced with pure panic. Dante didn't stop. His eyes, fixed on a blade at her throat, burned with an infernal light. You touch her, he growled, each word a promise of absolute annihilation, and I will personally ensure your lineage ends with you, Thorne. Every single one. Slowly, his men, following his unspoken command, froze, their weapons trained on Thorne. The raw, unfiltered hatred in Dante's voice, the chilling promise of eternal damnation, made Thorne flinch. He looked into Dante's eyes and saw not just a man, but a vengeful god, a primal force of retribution. The realization of his utter, inescapable defeat finally dawned on him. Dante raised his pistol, not at Thorne, but at the hand holding the blade. A single, precise shot. Thorne cried out, dropping the knife as a dark stain blossomed on his hand. The pistol clattered to the floor. Before Thorne could react, Dante was on him, moving with the speed of a coiled viper. He didn't use a weapon. He used his bare hands. A brutal, efficient blow to the solar plexus, then another, silencing Thorne's gasps. Then a quick, almost contemptuous twist, dislocating Thorne's shoulder. Thorne collapsed, a broken, whimpering mess, utterly defeated, utterly annihilated. Dante didn't even glance at him. He was already at Alara's side, his hands moving with surprising tenderness, slicing through the ropes that bound her wrists. The rough rope fell away, leaving angry red marks on her delicate skin. He immediately pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his solid, powerful chest. Overwhelming relief, potent and dizzying, washed over Alara. She buried her face in his shoulder, inhaling the familiar, clean scent of him, mingled now with the sharp tang of gunpowder and a faint metallic smell she didn't want to identify. Her body trembled uncontrollably, not just from the residual sedatives, but from the raw aftermath of terror and the sheer, undeniable reality of his presence. He was here. He had come for her. He had saved her. His arms were like steel bands, holding her against him, powerful, possessive embrace that left no room for doubt. His chin rested on the top of her head, his breath warm against her hair. You disobeyed, he murmured, his voice a low, dangerous growl, laced with both anger and a profound, possessive relief. You left my protection. Alara couldn't speak. She could only cling to him, her body shaking, the terror slowly receding, replaced by an intoxicating sense of absolute safety, a primal belonging. He pulled back slightly, his dark eyes, no longer burning with rage, now held a fierce, possessive tenderness that stole her breath away. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. Never again, Alara, he said, his voice raw with emotion, a vow whispered only for her. You are mine, irrevocably, unconditionally. His lips, firm and demanding, crushed down on hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a claiming, a declaration, a fierce primal assertion of ownership and love that fused their souls together in that brutal, blood-soaked warehouse. Alara responded with an abandon she hadn't known she possessed, her own desperate yearning meeting his overwhelming claim. In his arms, surrounded by the remnants of a war fought for her, she surrendered completely, utterly, and irrevocably. She was his. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly, absolutely safe. The cold, biting edges of terror faded slowly, replaced by a warmth so profound it felt like a heavy, silken blanket. Alara awoke to the impossibly soft rustle of expensive sheets against her skin, the gentle hum of purified air, and the faint, familiar scent of Dante's cologne. She was in her bed, in her wing of the penthouse, the opulent room now feeling less like a cage and more like a sanctuary after the harrowing darkness of the warehouse. Her head still throbbed, a dull ache behind her eyes, and her wrists burned where the ropes had chafed, but the overwhelming sense of dread had receded, replaced by a profound, almost dizzying relief. Dante was there. He sat in a dark leather armchair by the window, a silent, formidable sentinel. He hadn't changed from his suit, though the pristine white shirt underneath was now slightly rumpled, a stark contrast to his usual immaculate appearance. His gaze, dark and intense, was fixed on her, unwavering. The moment her eyes fluttered open, he was already beside her bed, his large hand gently pressing against her forehead, checking for fever. His touch, usually commanding, was now imbued with a meticulous, almost obsessive tenderness. "How do you feel?" His voice was a low, rough murmur, edged with a concern she'd never thought to hear from him. "Sore?" Dazed, Alara whispered, her throat dry. "What happened?" "Thorn." Dante's jaw tightened, a muscle flexing under his skin. "Thorn is handled, as are his remaining associates." The words were clipped, definitive, leaving no room for questions or doubt about the finality of their fate. "You were given a sedative. It will take time to wear off." He didn't offer details, but his eyes, cold and dark, held a promise of brutal retribution. For the next few days, Alara existed in a blur of recovery. Dante was omnipresent. He didn't leave her side for long, his presence a constant, anchoring force. He personally oversaw her care, feeding her light broths and soft foods with a surprising gentleness, ensuring she took her medication, silently adjusting pillows, pulling blankets tighter around her. His men, quiet and efficient, moved discreetly in and out, bringing fresh clothes, cool compresses, or simply checking on the perimeter. The contrast between this meticulous, almost tender care and the savage, brutal efficiency he had displayed in the warehouse was jarring, yet intoxicating. She saw two sides of him: the cold, calculating strategist and the fiercely protective guardian. Both were undeniably, terrifyingly his. She felt herself healing, physically and emotionally, under the cocoon of his absolute attention. The raw terror of Thorn's warehouse slowly faded, replaced by a profound, unshakable gratitude. He had come for her. He had burned down a part of his world to save her. One evening, as the city lights twinkled outside, Alara was strong enough to sit up in bed, sipping a cup of calming tea. Dante sat on the edge of the bed, not touching her, but close enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from his body, the subtle pull of his presence. His eyes, fixed on her, seemed to search for something, some lingering shadow of fear or doubt. "Thorn is ruined," he stated, his voice devoid of triumph, merely stating a fact. "His businesses are dismantled. His political connections exposed. His personal assets seized. He will spend the rest of his miserable life in a place where the sun never shines, owing debts to people far worse than himself." Alara's breath hitched. She imagined Thorn's smug face, now contorted by fear, his empire crumbling. "And his men? The ones who took me?" Dante's eyes hardened, turning to chips of ice. "They will not trouble anyone again. Ever." The finality in his tone was absolute. There was no need for explicit details. Alara understood. Her stomach churned, a mix of horror and a grim acceptance. This was his world. This was how his justice was served. It was brutal, uncompromising, and utterly irreversible. You did that for me," she whispered, the words laced with awe and a touch of fear. He reached out, his long fingers gently tracing the delicate curve of her cheek, his thumb brushing over the faint bruising near her temple. His touch was a stark reminder of the vulnerability she had experienced and the force he had exerted to banish it. "You are mine, Alara," he murmured, his voice a low, possessive growl. "You always were." He dared to touch what belonged to me. He dared to take what I claimed. There is no greater sin in my world, and there is no mercy for those who commit it. His dark eyes held hers, unwavering. When I said I would burn half this city to keep you breathing, I meant it. You have seen what that means now. You have seen what happens when someone dares to threaten what I protect. He waited, his gaze piercing, as if searching for a rejection, a recoiling. Alara swallowed hard, her heart pounding. The sheer ruthlessness of him, the unapologetic savagery of his justice, should have terrified her completely. And a part of her was terrified. But another part, the deep primal part that had yearned for safety and belonging, felt an overwhelming sense of rightness. In his dark world, his rules were absolute, his protection unwavering. And for her, in this moment, that was everything. She had seen the abyss. She had felt true terror. And he had pulled her back, not gently, but with a force that reshaped her entire reality. "Ah, I understand," she said, her voice barely audible, yet firm. "I understand your world." A faint, almost imperceptible softening touched Dante's eyes. "And you accept it?" "I accept it," Alara confirmed, her gaze unwavering, meeting his dark, intense stare. There was no going back to the naive girl who believed in polite society and conventional justice. She had seen the raw, ugly underbelly of power, and she had seen the man who wielded it, not just for himself, but for her. He leaned in, his lips brushing against her forehead, a soft, possessive kiss that felt like a brand. "Good, Alara," he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. "Because now, there are no more illusions. Only us. And our future." He pulled back, his hand still cupping her jaw. "The Vance Atelier will be rebuilt, more glorious than before. A true testament to the legacy it holds. Under your direction. Fully funded. Fully protected. And it will serve as a symbol. A symbol of what happens when Dante Volkov decides to protect something or someone." His eyes held hers, radiating a dark, unyielding promise. "Your father is safe. Your art is safe. And you, Alara, are safe. With me." Alara looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time without the veil of distrust or the fog of fear. He was a monster, yes, but a beautiful, powerful monster who had chosen her. And she, in turn, had chosen him. A profound sense of belonging, fierce and absolute, settled deep within her. It was a terrifying love, forged in fire and darkness. But isn't it true that our deepest wounds often hide our greatest strength? Alara, stripped of everything, found her voice not in opulence, but in defiant integrity. Her story reminds us that true worth isn't in what we possess, but who we refuse to stop being. And sometimes, the most dangerous hearts are the ones capable of the fiercest, most healing love, recognizing the broken pieces within us and choosing to protect them above all else. Your past struggles don't diminish your value. They forge your resilience, making you worthy of a love that fights for you. If this journey resonated with your own quiet battles, if you believe in love that reclaims and restores, then join our community. Hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments. I choose love.